$500,000 for my signature. After my husband's mistress became pregnant with twins, his family offered me $500,000 to sign the divorce papers. I signed without hesitation and left the country. It was only when he was secretly planning his wedding to the other woman that he received the divorce decree and my own positive pregnancy test, leaving him in shock. My name is Sophie. That night, the rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sound was like someone drumming a slow, heavy rhythm on my heart. I was in the kitchen warming up the beef stew Ethan loved so much when his phone vibrated again. Ethan was in the shower and had left it on the counter. The screen lit up with a name I'd never seen before. Clara. I'm not the type to snoop. In 5 years of marriage, I had learned that to live peacefully in another family's world, you have to maintain appearances and mutual respect. But that name kept flashing. And when the third call came, Ethan's voice echoed from the bathroom, slightly irritated. Sophie, can you get that for me, please? I picked up the phone with icy fingers. I had barely brought it to my ear when a choked voice on the other end said, I'm scared. Ethan burst out of the shower and reflexively snatched the phone from my hand. He turned his back to me, and his voice suddenly softened, becoming as plush as cotton. Calm down, sweetheart. I'm here. Don't cry. I'll take care of everything. I stood paralyzed in the middle of the kitchen. The spoon in my hand fell to the tiled floor with a sharp, piercing clatter. A small sound that seemed to fracture the entire house. From that night on, everything changed color. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, went 3 months without calling me once. The family dinners she once insisted on hosting were now just cold memories. My father-in-law, Arthur, always a man of few words, would look at me as if I were a worn-out piece of furniture. And Ethan still came home, but like a visitor. The collar and cuffs of his shirt sometimes carried a sweet, unfamiliar perfume. I told myself it could be a client, a colleague. I repeated it so often that when I said it aloud, it sounded like a lie to my own ears. This morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but as soon as I answered, I recognized my mother-in-law's voice. It no longer held the feigned sweetness of my dear girl, but a tone as cold and sharp as a hammer. Sophie, be at the estate today at 3 o'clock. I gripped the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It had been 3 months since I'd heard her voice. Yes, Mom. I'll be there. Don't call me Mom, she interrupted. You're about to lose that right. 3 o'clock sharp. If you're a minute late, don't bother coming through the gates. The click of the phone hanging up was like a slap. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking out at the manicured gardens of our Greenwich, Connecticut home, where I had lived for 5 years. Suddenly, it felt as foreign as a stranger's house. The orchids Ethan had given me, whose leaves I had tended one by one, now seemed to droop. The matching tea set on the kitchen shelf, which I had washed until my hands ached, now seemed like a bad joke. My best friend and called right after, her voice panicked. Sophie, it's all over the internet. Ethan was photographed going to an OB/GYN appointment with her. My God, she's pregnant. I opened my phone and clicked the link and had sent. The photo was sharp. Ethan had his arm around a young woman's shoulders, her baby bump visible beneath a loose dress. She was smiling broadly. The smile of someone who knows victory is in her grasp. Ethan was leaning in, his hand supporting her elbow, his gaze full of the same tenderness that had once belonged to me. The headline read, Billionaire heir's wife sidelined as husband escorts new partner to ultrasound, expecting twins. I didn't cry. It was strange. My heart ached, but my eyes were dry, as if all my tears had run out that night Ethan called another woman's sweetheart. At 2:50 p.m., I was in front of the gates of the family estate in the Connecticut countryside. The estate was the family's gathering place, an imposing property with staff always coming and going, the hedges trimmed with military precision, as if the slightest disorder was a disgrace to the family name. I had once thought of this place as my home. Now, looking at the wrought iron gates, I felt like I was entering a courtroom. The gatekeeper, Mr. Henderson, opened them for me. He looked at me with a hint of pity in his eyes. "Miss Sophie, Mrs. Montgomery is in the study." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." I walked down the long hallway, the sound of my heels echoing with each step. The scent of old wood and beeswax was the same as always, but the chill in the air felt different. I stopped in front of the study door, took a deep breath, and knocked twice. When I opened the door, I saw my mother-in-law sitting ramrod straight in her armchair. My father-in-law was beside her, his face expressionless. On the coffee table between them was a stack of papers perfectly aligned as if prepared long ago. I approached and greeted them with the required formality. "Good afternoon." "Sit," Arthur said, gesturing to the chair opposite them without another word. I sat, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap. In 5 years as a daughter-in-law, the one thing I had learned best was how to maintain my composure, even if a storm was raging inside. Eleanor got straight to the point. "I assume you're already aware of Ethan's affair with Clara." "Yes," I answered quietly. Arthur picked up the papers and pushed them toward me. "Clara is 3 months pregnant. With twins." I heard the word twins, and it was as if something inside me shattered. For the past 5 years, I had gone to countless consultations. I had taken so many supplements, tried so many remedies, listened to so much advice. I had sat alone in doctors' offices hearing them say, "We just have to keep trying," while forcing a polite smile as the pain choked me. And now someone else on her first try had not 1 but 2. Eleanor watched me, her voice so neutral she could have been negotiating a business deal. "This family needs a successor. If you can't provide us with heirs, at least don't occupy the position." I let out a short, dry laugh, not of amusement, but because I felt so foolish. Foolish for thinking patience would be rewarded with affection. Foolish for believing my efforts would ever be acknowledged. "So, you've brought me here today to tell me I need to step aside gracefully?" I asked. Eleanor nodded coldly. "You sign the divorce papers, and our family will compensate you." Arthur tapped the papers lightly. "Here's the agreement. Sign it and the family will wire you $500,000. It's enough for you to live on for the rest of your life." I looked at the number. I didn't know much about business, but I understood that to them $500,000 was a minor inconvenience, while to me it represented an entire lifetime. And there it was written on paper as simple as the price tag on a piece of merchandise. I turned the pages. In addition to the money, there were restrictive clauses. I could not speak to the press. I could not contact any journalists. I could not use the title of ex-wife for personal gain. And finally, a clause that chilled me to the bone. Upon signing, you have 7 days to leave the United States. You may not return for 3 years. I looked up. "You want to exile me?" Eleanor answered immediately without hesitation. "It's for your own good." "What would you stay here for? To watch Ethan marry someone else? To see them with 2 children in their arms? Take the money and start over." It sounded like concern, but I knew the truth. They were afraid my presence would be an inconvenience, a stain on their reputation, a complication for Ethan. They wanted me to disappear cleanly, like a smudge you rub away until it's gone. I gripped the edges of the paper and asked slowly, "And if I don't sign?" Arthur's gaze darkened. "Then we'll go to court." "But you know how court is. Not only will you get no money, but you'll end up with a ruined reputation. Whose side do you think the public will be on? A woman who can't have children can be blamed for all sorts of things." I felt a shiver, not of fear, but of coldness. The coldness of seeing how people could turn white into black, using fame and money to crush one woman. Eleanor added one last sentence like a final seal. "Choose your path. But remember one thing, your dignity is also this family's dignity. Don't make things difficult for us." I looked at the two people in front of me and suddenly remembered the first days of my marriage. Eleanor had taken my hand and said, "Now that you're here, you're part of the family." And I had believed her. I had believed her so much that I'd forgotten that in this world, even being family has an expiration date. I stood up and bowed my head with the required formality. "Excuse me, I'm asking for 3 days to think it over." Arthur nodded. 3 days, not one more. I turned and walked out. As I crossed the long hallway, my legs felt light, as if they weren't touching the floor. When I reached the courtyard, it began to rain. The drops hit my face cold and sharp. I stood under the portico for a moment, unsure if it was rain or tears wetting my lashes. I only knew one thing. When they offered me $500,000 in exchange for my signature, my 5-year marriage had just been priced in their eyes. And in the next 3 days, I would have to decide whether to cling to something already rotten, or to let it all go to save myself. I arrived back at the house as dusk fell. The rain was still coming down, a persistent drizzle, not loud, but constant, as if wanting to prolong the ache in one's heart. I opened the door and stepped inside. The smell of the stew I had left warming that morning still lingered in the kitchen. But the house was strangely empty. So empty I could hear my own heart beating and the ticking of the wall clock counting down the 3 days Arthur had given me. I took off my shoes and sank onto the sofa. My hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the feeling of being trapped, forced to choose between two equally bitter options. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to even my breathing. But the harder I tried to calm down, the louder the words from the estate echoed in my head. "Don't call me Mom if you can't provide us with heirs. At least don't occupy the position. $500,000. 7 days to leave the country." When I reached the last phrase, I burst out laughing. A dry, humorless laugh. The laugh of someone with nothing left to hold on to. "It's for your own good," they'd said, but really they just wanted me to disappear. They wanted everything neat and tidy without a single scratch on the family's reputation. And I was that scratch, a daughter-in-law who couldn't have children, a wife whose expiration date had passed. The phone vibrated. It was Anne. "Sophie, are you okay?" Her voice was low, restrained. "I'm fine," I said. But even I didn't believe the words. How could I be fine? "They're tearing you apart online. Some are saying you were just living off them. That you got kicked out because you couldn't have kids." My God, I read that and wanted to smash my phone. I remained silent, not because I wasn't angry, but because I knew anger was useless. Public opinion is like the wind. It blows in whatever direction is most convenient. Ethan was the golden boy. Clara was the future mother of twins, and I was the one left behind. They might pity me for a moment, insult me to feel better about themselves, but then they would forget. Only I wouldn't forget. And continued, her voice urgent. "What are you going to do? Don't tell me you're going to sign. I can't stand the thought of them getting married while kicking you out of the country like you're a bag of trash." The image of a bag of trash pierced my heart. "I haven't decided yet," I said quietly. "I have 3 days." Anne sighed. "Sophie, listen to me. Whether you sign or not, you need a plan B. Don't let them push you off a cliff. Do you have any documents? Anything related to your joint assets? Take pictures. Save everything. And please eat something. If you fall apart, they'll be the ones who are happy." "Okay," I whispered. And was right. For 5 years, I had been too gentle. So gentle, they thought I had no claws. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to do anything dirty, but I also didn't want to be backed into a corner where I couldn't even defend myself. I hung up and sat looking around the living room. On the mantelpiece, our wedding photo was still there, Ethan and I smiling under an arch of white flowers. That day before we went up to our suite, Ethan had taken my hand and whispered, "Sophie, from now on, I'll take care of you." And I had believed him. I had believed him so much that I'd forgotten that in this life, a promise without the morality to back it up is worth less than the paper it's written on. The front door opened, the sound of a car in the driveway. I glanced at the clock. Almost 7 p.m. Ethan was home unusually early. My heart against my will tightened. How, after 5 years together, could the mere sound of his car already feel like a knife twisting inside me? Ethan walked in, still in his work shirt, but not his usual impeccable self. The collar was slightly rumpled, his shirt untucked. He looked at me for a moment, then bent down to take off his shoes. It wasn't the look of a husband, but of someone gauging a reaction. "Where did you go this afternoon?" he asked. "I went straight to the estate." Ethan paused for a moment, then walked into the living room and sat on the sofa opposite me. He tried to keep his voice normal. "What did my parents say to you?" I looked him straight in the eye. I wanted to see if there was any feeling left there, but Ethan avoided my gaze. "They said they'd give me $500,000 to sign the divorce papers and send me out of the country." Ethan was silent for so long that his silence became the answer. If he had opposed it, he would have reacted immediately. But he didn't. I managed a faint smile. "And what do you think?" Ethan's brow furrowed, his voice weary. "Sophie, please don't make this difficult for me." That sentence was like a slap. I asked, articulating each word, "Am I making things difficult for you or did you make them difficult for me?" He sighed, sinking back into the sofa. "I never wanted it to come to this. But Clara, she's pregnant and it's twins. My parents, you know how they are. For them, the bloodline comes first." I felt like someone was squeezing my throat. "And me?" I asked. "What am I?" "You're my wife," he said quietly. I burst out laughing. I laughed so hard my eyes started to burn. "If I'm your wife, why did you go with another woman to an OB/GYN appointment? Why do you call her sweetheart on the phone? Why do your parents summon me to the estate like I'm a stranger coming to sign a sales contract?" Ethan's face tensed, his voice rising slightly, but it was an anger tinged with helplessness. "Sophie, what did you want me to do? Abandon her? Abandon my children?" I looked at Ethan and saw clearly how he was shifting all the blame onto me, as if he'd been forced into it. As if he were just a victim of circumstance. "You didn't have to abandon anyone," I said. "You just had to not betray me. But you already did." Ethan opened his mouth to speak but gave up. A moment later, he said in a heavier tone, like someone who had already rehearsed his speech, "I'm sorry." I heard those 2 words and felt an immense emptiness. Would an apology fix anything? Would it resurrect our marriage? Would it make the babies in Clara's womb disappear? "Do you love her?" I asked, more for myself than for him. Ethan was silent. Then he gave a barely perceptible nod. "I do. Very much." I felt my heart sink. It was no longer a sharp pain, but a heavy weight, like a stone dropping to the bottom of a river. When the man you love says he loves someone else, all your efforts become meaningless. I stood up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hand trembled slightly as I held the glass. I turned my back to him so he wouldn't see my red-rimmed eyes. I spoke with surprising calm. "You came here to tell me to sign, didn't you?" Ethan stood and followed me, keeping a slight distance. "Sophie, I don't want you to suffer. Sign it, take the money, go abroad, and start over. Staying here will only hurt you more." I turned and looked at him. "Are you saying that because you're worried about me or because you're worried your reputation will be tarnished?" Ethan hesitated for just a second, but it was long enough for me to understand. I set the water glass on the counter and said slowly, "In 5 years as your wife, I never asked you to buy me houses or cars. I never put you in a difficult position with your parents. I only asked for one thing, loyalty, and you couldn't give me that. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. I sighed. I didn't want to argue anymore. I knew the more I spoke, the more dignity I would lose. I asked one last question, like a final nail in the coffin. If I don't sign, what will you do? Ethan looked up. There was a glint of coldness in his eyes. The coldness of someone who had been instructed by someone else to be tough. My father has already hired lawyers. Sophie, don't make things worse. I understood. If I didn't sign amicably, they would use the law against me, and when they did, they would have the money, the lawyers, and public opinion on their side. And I had nothing but empty hands and the reputation of being unable to have children. That night, Ethan slept on the sofa in the living room. I lay in our bedroom staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. I could only hear the rain and my own heart, and I wondered where I had gone wrong. Was it because I couldn't have children that I deserved to be traded for money? In the end, is a woman's value always measured by her ability to get pregnant? Around midnight, I got a text from Anne. Don't let them break you. If you have to leave, leave with your head held high. I looked at the message and tears finally fell onto the pillow. I didn't want to be broken. I also didn't want to turn into a crazy woman who ruins her ex-husband's wedding. I just wanted justice. But life is rarely just. I opened the closet and took out a small wooden box. Inside were all my medical records from the past few years. Test results, prescriptions, papers that proved just how hard I had tried. I picked up each sheet, my heart aching. If I signed, I would lose my husband. But if I didn't sign, I might also lose my honor. 3 days. They had given me 3 days. I lay back, hugged the pillow, and whispered to myself, Sophie, don't let yourself fall. Not for anyone. For yourself. That night, I barely slept. I lay facing the wall, listening to the rain subside outside and the sound of Ethan shifting in the living room. Every time he coughed or turned over, my heart jumped as if our 5 years together refused to let me go. I closed my eyes, but the image of that afternoon at the estate persisted, my mother-in-law's cold voice, my father-in-law's calculating gaze, and the stack of white divorce papers on the table, like a death sentence. I dozed off briefly toward morning, but woke with a wave of intense nausea. The feeling was strange. I ran to the bathroom and dry-heaved, nothing coming up. I looked at myself in the mirror, my face pale, my lips dry. I tried to calm myself. It must be the lack of sleep, the overwhelming stress. I had barely eaten in days. It was normal for my body to protest. I washed my face, got dressed, and went down to the kitchen to fix a glass of milk. Ethan was already awake, smoking by the window. The cigarette smoke hung in the air, and the strong smell made me feel even more nauseous. I'm going out for a while today, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to look at me. Where are you going? I'm meeting Anne, and then I'm going to the hospital for some tests. I told a half-truth, a half-lie. In reality, I didn't even know what tests I wanted. I just felt that something was off with my body, and I needed a definitive answer from a doctor, good or bad. Ethan nodded without asking any more questions. In the past, he would have worried if I so much as sneezed. Now, I was going to the hospital alone, and he seemed not to care at all. I left the house and took a deep breath. The morning air, still damp from the rain, helped clear my head. I called and arranged to meet her later. Then I took a cab to my usual private clinic. Sitting in the waiting room, watching the other women with their round bellies, holding hands with their husbands, I felt the urge to look down. I had sat here before with the same fragile hope they had, but I had always left with the same result. Not yet. I told myself I was used to it. But today, my heart was beating faster than usual. The doctor was a middle-aged woman with a gentle voice. She asked a few questions about my symptoms, my cycle. When I told her about the recent nausea and fatigue, she looked at me more closely and ordered some tests. I waited for the results, my heart empty. I didn't dare to hope. Hope had betrayed me too many times. About half an hour later, the doctor called my name. I walked into her office, clutching my purse tightly. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said in a steady voice. "The results indicate that you are pregnant." I froze. My ears were ringing as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water over my head. I asked again, my voice trembling. "Doctor, what did you say?" "You're pregnant. About 6 weeks along. Your levels are stable for now, but your body is a bit weak. We'll need to monitor you closely." I don't remember how I walked out of the office. I only remember the results sheet trembling in my hand. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I did the math in my head. 6 weeks ago, Ethan was still sleeping in the same room as me before he moved to the living room, before he publicly took Clara to her appointment. I sat on a bench in the hallway. My stomach was still flat with no outward sign. And yet, inside me, a tiny life was growing. 5 years of longing, 5 years of waiting. The child I thought I would never have had arrived at the exact moment everything was falling apart. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Laugh with joy, cry with bitterness. Why was life so ironic? If this baby had come just a little sooner, would everything have been different? Or even if it had, would I still be the one not chosen? And found me at the clinic. Seeing me sitting there in a daze, she grew worried. "Sophie, what's wrong? Is the appointment over?" I looked up at her and the tears came uncontrollably. I handed her the paper. She took it, read it, and her eyes widened. Suddenly, she pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh my God, Sophie, you're pregnant." I started sobbing in her arms, crying in a way I hadn't cried for days. And rubbed my back, her voice shaking. "Finally, Sophie, you finally did it." After I cried, fear set in. I looked at Anne and asked in a low voice, "And what do I do now?" She pulled back, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "First of all, calm down. You are pregnant. This is your news. Don't tell anyone yet, especially not his family." I nodded. I was thinking the same thing. If my in-laws found out, they would change their attitude immediately. But why? For me or for the baby in my womb? And if they knew, would they leave me in peace? Or would they try to take my child as if it were property? Now, and continued, you have to think about your child. Whether you sign or not, every decision you make from now on will affect them. I placed a hand on my stomach, my heart in turmoil. This baby was my child, my flesh and blood. But it was also Ethan's child. And if Ethan knew, I didn't dare think about the rest. I went home alone at noon. Ethan wasn't there. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I changed, lay down on the bed, and placed my hand on my belly. I whispered very softly, as if afraid to wake someone. "My baby. Mommy doesn't know what to do. You've come at a time when I'm at my weakest." A tear fell onto the pillow. I didn't regret this, baby. I only regretted that this world was so cruel to women like me. In the late afternoon, Ethan arrived. He walked into the bedroom and saw me lying down. "Are you tired?" he asked. "Yes," I answered curtly. He stood there for a moment, then said, "Sophie, my parents called. They reminded me about the deadline. Tomorrow is the last day." I turned to look at him. In that moment, I had an overwhelming urge to tell him the truth, to ask him if, upon learning I was pregnant, he would choose me or continue to choose Clara and her twins. But I held back. I didn't want my child to become a bargaining chip. "I know," I said. Ethan nodded, looking relieved. That relief chilled my heart. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat up in bed, opened the drawer, and took out the divorce agreement. I reread every line. $500,000, leave the country. 3 years without returning. If I signed, I would lose my husband, but I might be able to protect my child from his family. If I didn't sign, they would find out one way or another, and a war would begin. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling the fragile life forming inside. For the first time in my life, I felt I wasn't alone. I was no longer just Sophie, the rejected daughter-in-law. I was a mother. Toward morning, I made my decision, a difficult but necessary one. I folded the agreement and put it in my purse. I looked outside where the dawn was just beginning to break. Whatever happened, I would move forward with my head held high. The next morning, I woke up very early. The house was still quiet with only the sound of birds in the garden and the faint sunlight filtering through the curtains. Ethan wasn't up yet. I went to the kitchen and made a glass of warm water, sipping it slowly. My stomach was still a little unsettled, but I felt better than the day before. I placed my hand on my belly, a gesture that had become second nature, and sighed. Although I couldn't feel anything concrete yet, I knew a little being was there. And from the moment I knew, my choices were no longer just for me. I got dressed and prepared to leave. Before I left, I took one last look at the house. 5 years ago, I had entered it believing I had found a family. 5 years later, I was leaving with a bitter truth. Some places only let you stay as long as you have value. I didn't take much, just a handbag with the folded divorce agreement inside. I called and before getting in the car. Her voice was worried. "You're going already? I want to come with you." "There's no need, Anne. I can go alone," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "If anything happens, call me immediately and remember what I told you." "I remember." I hung up. I looked out the car window. The city was bustling in the morning, people rushing about their day. No one knew that inside me a silent farewell was taking place, one that would change my life forever. The estate looked the same as the day before, silent and imposing. Mr. Henderson opened the gate. Seeing me, he hesitated for a moment, then bowed his head. "Miss Sophie, good morning." "Mr. Henderson." I walked into the drawing room. My mother-in-law was already there, sitting with her back straight, her face expressionless. My father-in-law was beside her, holding a newspaper, but I knew he wasn't reading it. The air in the room was so heavy, I could hear my own footsteps on the stone floor. I sat in the chair opposite them and placed my bag on my lap. My mother-in-law spoke first. "Have you thought it over?" "Yes, I have," I replied. My father-in-law put down his newspaper and looked me straight in the eye. "Good. Then sign." I opened my bag and took out the agreement. For a moment, I looked at the typed lines. Then I looked up. "Before I sign, I have one condition." My mother-in-law's eyebrows furrowed. "What condition?" "I want to leave the country as soon as the paperwork is finalized. I don't want to be present for the wedding. I don't want to appear in the press, and I request that the reason for the divorce be kept private." My father-in-law looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. "Fine, as long as you abide by what's in the agreement." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake as I had expected. As the ink touched the paper, I heard the sound of the pen gliding like a final full stop to my 5 years of marriage. I signed and pushed the papers toward them. My mother-in-law took them, examined the signature, and gave a slight nod. Not a word of thanks, not an ounce of remorse. My father-in-law called for the lawyer, who came in to handle the rest of the formalities. Everything happened quickly, precisely, and coldly, like a long, calculated transaction. When I stood to leave, I bowed my head. "Goodbye, Arthur." "Goodbye, Eleanor." I deliberately didn't call her Mom. My mother-in-law looked surprised for a moment, then turned her face away. I walked out of that house with a lighter heart. I knew there were many storms ahead, but at least I had taken the first step. At noon, I stopped by the clinic again to ask the doctor about necessary precautions. I didn't tell Ethan, and I had no intention of telling anyone in his family. This was my secret, mine and my baby's. When I got home that afternoon, Ethan was already there. He looked at me, his gaze questioning. "Where have you been all day? Did you go to the estate?" "I did," I answered directly. He fell silent. I put my bag on the table, took out the copy of the signed agreement, and handed it to him. I signed. Ethan took the paper, scanned it, and let out a long sigh. In that moment, I clearly saw the relief on his face. That relief squeezed my heart, but also made me more resolute. "Thank you, Sophie," he said in a hoarse voice. I gave a bitter smile. "You don't need to thank me. From now on, we don't owe each other anything." Ethan looked at me as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. He just nodded. "My parents said the money will be wired today. They're handling the flight arrangements, too." "Okay," I replied. That night, I started packing my suitcases. Ethan didn't help, nor did he stop me. He stayed in the living room and I stayed in the bedroom, each in our own world. I folded each piece of clothing, each personal item. Some things brought back memories, but I left them behind anyway. I didn't want to carry memories. I only wanted to carry the future. Around midnight, Ethan appeared at the bedroom door. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Sophie, I'm sorry." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. I didn't feel hatred, only weariness. "Sorry for what?" I asked. "For not protecting you." I was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Apologies are easy, but some things can't be undone." Ethan nodded and walked away. I closed the bedroom door, leaned against it, and the tears came without my noticing. I wasn't crying because I had lost him. I was crying for myself for having believed too much. The next morning, I went to the airport. And came with me. Her eyes were red, but she tried to smile. "Take good care of yourself. If anything happens, call me immediately." "I will." And hugged me tightly, as if afraid she would lose me if she let go. I patted her back. "I'll be okay this time. I'm going to live my life the right way." After checking in, I turned and took one last look at the city. In this place, I had loved, suffered, and lost. But it was also where I had learned to stand up again. On the plane, I sat by the window. As the wheels left the ground, I placed my hand on my stomach and whispered, "My baby, from today on, it's just you and me. I can't promise you the greatest wealth, but I promise you a life of dignity." The sky ahead was a surprising blue. I closed my eyes and felt my heart settle. My new life and my child's life was beginning here. The plane landed late at night. Through the window, I saw rows of yellow lights stretching out, silent and orderly, so different from the noise I was used to. I walked out of the London airport, pulling my small suitcase, my heart both empty and full. Empty because there was nothing behind me to return to. Full because ahead of me was a completely new path where I could only rely on myself. And texted to ask if I had arrived safely. I replied briefly, "Landed, everything's fine." I didn't mention the loneliness seeping into my chest. Some sorrows you have to keep to yourself, especially when you've chosen this path. The first few days in a new country passed slowly. I rented a small, bright apartment in a quiet neighborhood. In the mornings, I would make my own tea and stand by the window, watching people go to work and school. Everyone seemed to have a clear purpose. In the afternoons, I would walk around the neighborhood, trying to get used to the new rhythm of life. At night, I would lie in bed, hand on my stomach, whispering to my child as if they could already hear me. "My baby, it's just us here. You have to grow up strong and healthy so mommy can be at ease." In those moments, I allowed myself to be a little weaker, to feel nostalgic for my old kitchen, even for the days I thought were happy. But I didn't allow myself to feel nostalgic for Ethan. Not because I had already forgotten him, but because I knew nostalgia wouldn't change anything. The money was wired to my account as Arthur had promised. A sum so large it felt foreign. I didn't feel joy, only a clearer sense that the price of my 5-year marriage had been paid in their eyes. I used a small portion for daily expenses and put the rest in a long-term savings account. I didn't want to be wasteful. I had to prepare for my child's future. In the second week, I went for a checkup. The doctor was the same kind middle-aged woman. When she turned on the ultrasound screen, I held my breath. A tiny flickering dot appeared. The doctor pointed to it. "There's your baby." I stared, my heart pounding. I couldn't hear the heartbeat yet, nor feel any movement. But in that moment, I knew for certain that I was no longer alone. I left the clinic with a very different feeling. Not the fear of the first time, but a quiet determination. That night, Video called me. Seeing my face, she sighed with relief. "You look better." "Yes, it's very peaceful here." I smiled. And looked at me for a moment, then asked in a low voice. "Sophie, are you going to tell Ethan?" I shook my head without hesitation. "No, why not?" "Because I don't want my child to be born in the middle of a negotiation. If he knows, that family won't leave me in peace and I don't have the strength to fight them." And was silent, then nodded. "I understand. I just feel bad for you." "I feel bad for myself too," I said, half joking, half serious. After the call, I sat for a long time. It wasn't that I hadn't thought about it. I wondered what he would do if he knew. But then I would stop myself. Those questions only made me weaker. I had to be strong for my child. One morning, while organizing papers in my bag, I found the bracelet Ethan had given me when we first got married. I had forgotten about it. A simple silver bracelet. The day he gave it to me, he said he hoped I would always be at peace. I picked it up, held it tightly in my fingers, then let it go. In the end, I put it away in a drawer. I didn't wear it, but I didn't throw it away either. Some things you don't need to have close, but you also don't need to destroy. Time passed and my belly began to show. My body was changing slowly but noticeably. I was learning to listen to myself, to eat a balanced diet, to rest at the right times. There were nights I dreamed of my mother. She would be at the door of our old house, calling me in her familiar voice, "Sophie, be strong, my girl." I would wake up with my pillow wet with tears, but my heart warm. One afternoon, sent me a link. I hesitated for a moment, but finally opened it. On the screen was the familiar image of Ethan, impeccable in his suit, standing next to Clara. The caption below mentioned their upcoming wedding. I immediately closed the screen. My heart ached for a moment, then settled. I didn't feel jealousy, only a sense of strangeness. That man no longer belonged to my world. That night, I told my baby, "Your father is going to marry another woman, but that's okay. Mommy is enough for you." I don't know if I said it to soothe him or to soothe myself, but after saying it, I felt lighter. In the following days, I started looking for a job. I couldn't live solely off the money they had given me. I wanted to work. I wanted to provide for my child through my own efforts. I sent my resume to a few places and got a couple of interviews. Each time I went, I reminded myself, "Sophie, you are no longer the daughter-in-law of that family. You are a mother." One day, walking home, I saw a small family ahead of me. The mother held a child's hand, and the father pushed a stroller. I stopped and watched them, my heart tightening. I knew my child wouldn't have a complete family like that, but I also knew that complete isn't measured by the number of people, but by kindness and love. That night, I wrote in the small journal I had brought from home. "Today, you grew a little bigger. Mommy is still here. After writing, I put the journal down and sighed deeply. I no longer felt as lost as before. I was still scared, but the fear no longer paralyzed me. In a foreign place, I was relearning how to live without depending on anyone, without waiting for anyone's compassion. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that since my child arrived, I have a reason to keep going. No matter how difficult the path, I would walk it. I stood by the window, watching the street lights, and whispered like a promise, "Don't worry, my baby. Mommy won't let anyone hurt you." Time passed faster than I thought. Almost without realizing it, I entered my 4th month of pregnancy. The baby bump was now clearly visible. It was no longer a vague feeling, but a very real, very close presence. Every morning, the first thing I did was place a hand on my belly, listening to my body, a newly formed habit, yet already deeply ingrained. My new job helped keep me busy. It was a small company, nothing flashy, but with a quiet atmosphere and polite colleagues. They didn't ask many questions about my past. They only cared about what I could do. I liked that feeling. Here, I wasn't the daughter-in-law of a wealthy family, nor the abandoned wife. I was just Sophie, a woman trying to live with dignity. That afternoon, as I was tidying up my desk, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. A man's deep voice, both familiar and strange. "Is this Sophie?" My heart stopped for a second. "Yes, this is she," I replied. "It's Mr. Henderson." I was shocked. Mr. Henderson, the estate's gatekeeper, the man who had watched me in that house, who had always called me Miss Sophie, in the gentlest voice. "Ah, Mr. Henderson, how are you?" I replied, a sudden lump in my throat. Mr. Henderson was silent for a few seconds, then continued in a lower voice. "I'm calling because young Mr. Ethan hasn't been doing well lately." I gripped the phone tightly. "Not doing well? How so?" But I didn't ask. I was afraid my question would reveal the concern I had tried so hard to bury. "I don't mean to meddle in your business," he continued. "But I've watched him grow up. Since you left, Miss Sophie, young Ethan has been drinking a lot, and his mother isn't happy either." I closed my eyes, the image of Ethan alone in the living room with the dim yellow light and a bottle of whiskey beside him appearing vividly in my mind. I had been there before. I had seen it. I had worried. But that was the past. "I just called to say that," Mr. Henderson sighed. "You take care of yourself. What's past is past." "Yes," I said softly. "Thank you for your concern." I hung up and sat for a long time. I wasn't happy to hear that Ethan wasn't doing well. I didn't feel any pleasure from it. I only felt an old sadness stirring inside me before quickly settling down again. Some relationships, even if feelings remain, cannot be mended. That afternoon, and called, her voice tense. "Sophie, I just found something out." "What is it?" I asked. "Ethan's wedding. There's been a problem." My heart skipped a beat. "What problem?" "Clara had a placental abruption. Her family is in chaos. It seems your mother-in-law has forced her onto absolute bed rest. She won't let her go anywhere." I was silent. And continued quickly. "I'm telling you this so you can prepare. I'm worried they'll start thinking about you again." I placed my hand on my belly and took a deep breath. "I know, but I'm not going back." "Yes, but I'm afraid they'll find out you're pregnant." I shook my head even though and couldn't see me. "No one knows, and I won't let them find out." I hung up, feeling my heart grow heavier. Not out of fear for Clara or my old family. I was afraid that the fragile peace I was building would be destroyed. I had chosen this path and I had to protect it to the end. That night, I went for a routine checkup. The doctor let me hear the baby's heartbeat for the first time. The rhythmic sound thump 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 filled the small room. I froze, tears streaming down my face, unable to stop them. The baby is doing well, the doctor smiled. You can rest easy. I nodded repeatedly, unable to say a word. On the way home, I walked slower than usual. I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, "Did you hear that, my baby? That's your heart." For the first time, I felt a complete happiness unmixed with worry. This baby didn't need a family name. It didn't need an inheritance. It just needed to be born into love. In the following days, I began to prepare for the future more concretely. I looked into schools, insurance, things that seemed far off, but I knew would come quickly. I wanted to be prepared when my son was born, not panicking. One night, as I was folding some baby clothes I had bought, the phone vibrated again. This time it was Ethan. I stared at his name on the screen for a long time. My fingers hesitated, but finally I answered. Sophie. Ethan's voice was tired. How are you? I swallowed. I'm fine, Ethan. Mr. Henderson told me you're working now. Is everything going well over there? Ethan was quiet, then said in a low voice, Sophie, I'm sorry. Those 2 words no longer hurt me as they once did. I only felt tired. Did you call just to say that? No, he replied. I wanted to know if you hate me. I looked out the window. The streetlights cast a yellow glow. I spoke slowly. I did hate you, but not anymore. I'm just tired. Ethan sighed. Sophie, if I had been stronger back then, there are no ifs, I interrupted. You made your choice and I made mine. He was silent for a long moment. Then, in a choked voice, he said, Take care of yourself. You, too, I replied. I hung up before he could say anything more. My heart was beating fast, but it was no longer in turmoil. I knew I had crossed a line. I didn't need those apologies to move forward. That night, I had a dream. I dreamt I was in a small kitchen with sunlight streaming through the window. A child ran toward me, hugged my legs, and called out, Mommy. I bent down, picked him up, and felt an immense peace. I woke up smiling. I was no longer afraid of the future. I knew that no matter how hard it got, I would get through it. Not because I was naturally strong, but because now I had a reason to be. I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, My baby, I don't know what challenges life has in store for us, but I promise you, whatever happens, I will never let you go. Outside it began to rain lightly. I sat by the window watching the drops fall, and suddenly I understood something very simple. Some losses don't destroy you. They guide you to a different path, a better, more dignified one. The 5th month passed quietly. I was getting used to the new rhythm of life. Waking up each morning feeling my body a little heavier, my breath a little slower. My belly was now prominent, impossible to hide under loose clothes. Every time I looked in the mirror, I took a little longer to observe the woman there, both strange and familiar. My gaze was different. It no longer held the resignation of a wife trying to save her family, but the calm of a mother preparing to protect her child. Work was stable. My boss, a quiet but decent middle-aged man, knew I was pregnant. He simply said, Do what you can. Your health comes first. Hearing that, I felt a warmth in my heart. Here, no one asked me who I used to be, only if I was okay now. That afternoon, as I was clearing my desk, and called, her voice urgent. Sophie, listen to me carefully. What is it? I asked, my heart suddenly racing. Your old family. They know. I froze. They know what? They know you're pregnant. My ears started ringing. I gripped the edge of the desk. How do they know? It was Mr. Henderson, and said in a low voice. It wasn't malicious. It seems he called to check on you and your mother-in-law overheard the end of the conversation. She got suspicious. Had someone look into it? Sophie, they're in an uproar. I closed my eyes. What I had feared most had finally happened. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. Does Ethan know? Yes, Sophie, she continued in a more serious tone. I'm going to be direct. They're planning to come see you. Come see me, I repeated. Yes, your mother-in-law says the baby is their grandchild and can't be lost. I let go of the desk and sat down. A chill ran down my spine. I had signed the divorce, left the country, agreed to lose everything, and now they wanted to take the only thing I had left. Sophie, you need to prepare, and said. This time it won't be easy. I hung up and sat for a long time. The office emptied out as people left for the day. I placed my hand on my belly. For the first time in months, I was scared, not for myself, but for my child. I didn't know what they would do, but I knew one thing. If they wanted a fight, they wouldn't be gentle. That night, Ethan called. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Sophie, his voice was rushed. Listen to me. I'm listening, I replied, my voice dry. I know you're pregnant, he paused. Why didn't you tell me? I gave a bitter smile. Tell you for what, Ethan? That's my child. Ethan's voice trembled. I have a right to know. A right? I asked. When you signed those divorce papers, you gave up that right with your own hand. I didn't give up my child, he nearly shouted. I gave up on you, but my child is my blood. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I tried to keep my voice steady. What do you want? Ethan was silent for a moment, then said, My parents want to meet with you. They want to talk. I let out a joyless laugh. Talk or take my child. Sophie, he sighed. Don't assume the worst. My parents just want to acknowledge their grandchild. Acknowledge their grandchild. I gripped the phone. And me? What do they expect me to do? Have the baby and hand him over? Ethan didn't answer. That silence was the clearest answer of all. Listen carefully, I said slowly, word by word. This baby is my child. I'm the one carrying him. I'm the one who will raise him. No one has the right to take him from me. Sophie, don't be so drastic, Ethan said. You're alone in a foreign country. How will you manage to raise a child? My family has the resources. The baby will have a better life. I heard that and felt a coldness that seeped into my bones. So, you admit that in your eyes I'm not a competent mother? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. That's not what I said, he quickly replied. I'm just thinking about the child's future. Are you thinking about the child or about your family? I interrupted. Ethan was silent for a long time, then said in a low voice, Sophie, please don't make this difficult. My parents won't give up easily. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down, but my voice remained firm. Listen carefully. I'm not coming back, and I'm not giving up my child. If they want to sue, I will fight them to the end. Sophie, he called out. I'm tired, I said. Don't call me again. I hung up, my body shaking. I never thought I would have to confront them like this, but placing my hand on my belly, I knew I couldn't back down. That night, I didn't sleep. I researched online, looking up laws, the rights of a single mother. I looked for lawyers. I didn't want to fight with emotion. I had to prepare with reason. My child needed a clear-headed mother, not a panicked woman. The next morning, I took the day off work. I went to meet a lawyer and had recommended. She was a woman in her 40s with a sharp gaze and a calm voice. After listening to my story, she nodded. Legally, you are divorced and pregnant in a foreign country. Custody of the child is yours by default. The father's family can apply pressure, but it won't be easy for them to take the child from you. But they are very rich, I said quietly. She smiled. Being rich doesn't mean they can do whatever they want. The important thing is that you remain calm and don't give them any leverage. I left the lawyer's office feeling a little more at ease. Not because I was sure I would win, but because I knew I wasn't alone or empty-handed. In the afternoon, and called again, her voice even more tense. Your mother-in-law said she's flying to see you this week. I took a deep breath. Okay, I'll meet with her. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. Running away solves nothing. That night, I stayed in my apartment mentally preparing for the meeting. I knew my mother-in-law wasn't coming for a social visit. She was coming to fight. And I, for the first time in my life, was not going to bow my head. I looked at myself in the mirror at my prominent belly. I placed my hand on it and whispered, my baby, the days ahead will be difficult, but mommy promises she won't let anyone take you, no matter what. Outside, the wind howled, making the windows rattle slightly. I no longer felt as weak as before. I might not have my ex-husband's family. I might not have a husband by my side, but I had my son. And for me, that was everything. The morning my mother-in-law arrived in London, the sky was grey, as if heralding an unpleasant meeting. I woke very early, though I had barely slept. In the mirror, I saw the dark circles under my eyes, but my gaze was no longer vacant. I put on a simple neutral-colored maternity dress and applied a little makeup. I didn't want to look weak, but I didn't need to look defiant either. I was just a mother protecting her child. Around 9, and called to say she had just seen my mother-in-law. With her was Arthur's brother, my former uncle-in-law. Hearing this, my heart tightened. His presence meant she wasn't coming for a private conversation, but was prepared for a formal confrontation to intimidate me. I stood by the window for a long time. When the doorbell rang, my hand instinctively went to my belly. The baby gave a small kick as if reminding me of its presence. I took a deep breath and went to open the door. My mother-in-law stood before me, looking the same as ever, hair in a flawless bun, a dark coat, her expression stern and cold. Beside her, my uncle-in-law sized me up from head to toe. Hello, Eleanor. Hello, uncle, I said, bowing my head politely. My mother-in-law looked at me, her gaze lingering on my belly. She didn't respond immediately, simply walked in and sat on the sofa. My uncle-in-law gave a formal nod. I served them water, placed the glasses in front of them, and sat opposite. The air was so heavy, I could hear my own heart beating. You're very clever, was the first thing my mother-in-law said, her voice neutral. Getting pregnant and hiding it so well. I remained calm. I had no intention of hiding anything. It's just that at that point I was no longer your daughter-in-law. She gave a bitter smile. Divorced or not, the baby you're carrying is our family's blood. Do you think you have the right to hide him? I clasped my hands but continued to speak slowly. Eleanor, I am the one who is pregnant. I am the one who will give birth. I have the right to decide when to speak. The right? My mother-in-law raised her voice. On what basis do you speak of rights? Do you know what last name this child will carry? I looked her straight in the eye. He will carry mine. My uncle-in-law frowned. Sophie, speak with due respect. You were our family's daughter-in-law. Don't forget that. I have never forgotten, I replied. But I also haven't forgotten how I was treated. My mother-in-law slammed her fist on the table. Don't bring up old stories. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to make things clear. This baby our family must accept. Accept how? I asked. After he's born, you can raise him for a while, but in the long run, he must return to his father's family. We have the resources, a complete family, a father. What do you think you can give him? I felt a lump in my throat, but I still answered. I can give him a mother's love and peace. Peace? She scoffed. Can a child without a father by his side have peace? I turned to my uncle-in-law. Uncle, what do you think? He sighed. I'll be frank, Sophie. You're young. You're abroad. Raising a child alone will be very difficult. The father's family doesn't want to steal your child. They want what's best for him. The best for him or for your family's reputation? I asked, my voice no longer trembling. The atmosphere grew tense. My mother-in-law looked at me, her gaze as sharp as a knife. You've changed a lot. Yes, I had to change, I replied. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be here today. She was silent for a moment, then said, Ethan is coming, too. I was surprised. What is he coming for? He's the child's father. He has the right, she said definitively. No, I shook my head. He has the right to visit his son, but he doesn't have the right to decide for me. You're too stubborn, Sophie, my mother-in-law said, her voice lower. You know that if our family gets serious about this, you won't have any peace. I looked up at her. I know, but I'm not scared. My uncle-in-law intervened. Have you thought this through? A prolonged legal process will affect your state of mind, your pregnancy. Will you be able to handle it? I placed both hands on my belly. For my son, I will handle it. My mother-in-law stood and walked toward me. She looked at me for a long moment, then said in a low but forceful voice, Don't think being pregnant is a shield. Our family does not lack resources. I stood up too, though my legs were trembling slightly. I'm not using my child as a shield. I am just a mother. At that moment, I saw the anger in her eyes, but perhaps she also realized that I was no longer the submissive daughter-in-law of the past. Fine, my mother-in-law said, adjusting her coat. Keep the baby. But I'm warning you, this isn't over. She turned and walked straight to the door. My uncle-in-law sighed, shook his head, and followed. He looked at me, his eyes holding a hint of remorse. Take care of yourself. I nodded without saying anything more. When the door closed, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the sofa, and the tears came not from fear, but from the accumulated tension. I hugged my belly and sobbed. My baby. Mommy did well today. The baby gave a few light rhythmic kicks. I smiled through my tears. That evening, Ethan called. I didn't want to answer, but I finally did. Sophie, I've arrived. His voice was tired. I want to meet with you. Why? I asked. I want to talk properly, he said in a low voice, about our son. I was silent for a moment, then replied. Okay, but just talk. No pressure. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe. When Ethan walked in, I barely recognized him. He was thinner, his gaze lacking its usual confidence. How are you? He asked. I'm fine, I replied. His gaze fell on my belly, full of complexity. Is the baby okay? He's fine. Ethan sat down, his hands clasped together. Sophie, I'm so sorry. Truly. I looked at him without responding. I never imagined things would get to this point, he continued. I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, what would you have done? I asked. Ethan was silent. Then he said sincerely. We probably would have divorced anyway. But I wouldn't have let you go so far away. I smiled sadly. So what's the difference? He lowered his head. I was wrong. You were very wrong, I said quietly. But this isn't the time to talk about right and wrong, Ethan. He looked up. I don't want to fight you for our son. I just want to be able to be a father. I looked him in the eye. Then do you have the courage to stand up to your parents? Do you have the courage to say that the child is mine to raise and you will only visit? Ethan froze. He was silent for a very long time. That silence chilled my heart. I understood. I stood up. When you have that courage, then we'll talk. I walked out without looking back. This time I didn't cry. I was used to finding my own answers. That night, I lay in bed thinking about what would happen next. I knew the storm wasn't over yet, but at least I hadn't backed down. After the meeting with Ethan, I walked the streets with an empty heart. It wasn't the sharp pain of the early days of the forced divorce, but the weariness of someone who had understood the limits of a person she once loved. I realized Ethan wasn't a bad person, but he was weak. Weak in the face of his family, weak in the face of pressure, and weak in the face of himself. Such a man, even for his own son, wouldn't have the strength to protect him. In the days that followed, my mother-in-law didn't call again. Her silence made me more anxious than her direct threats. I knew her type well. When she wasn't talking, she was plotting. I wasn't naive enough to hope she would give up. I focused on my health. Every morning, I took a slow walk around the neighborhood, my hand on my belly, talking to my son. I told him whether the day was sunny or rainy, that Mommy had eaten well, that he could grow peacefully. Sometimes I felt crazy talking to my stomach, but it was in those moments that my heart felt calm. And called me more frequently. She worried I couldn't handle it all alone. Sophie, if you need me, I'll come stay with you for a while. There's no need, Anne. I smiled faintly. You have your family, your job. I can take care of myself. But that family doesn't give up easily. I know. I replied. But my son isn't easy to steal either. A week later, I received a letter from my ex-husband's family lawyer. The content was brief, but enough to send a chill down my spine. They were demanding confirmation of paternity after the baby's birth and proposing a negotiation for custody in the best interests of the child. Every word was polite, but hid their usual arrogance. I took the letter, my hand trembling slightly. I wasn't afraid of the legal process, but I worried the prolonged stress would affect my son. I called my lawyer. After listening, she simply said, "They're testing your reaction." What should I do? I asked. Don't respond right away. Let them get impatient, she said. The calmer you remain, the more they lose their advantage. That night, Ethan called again. This time, his voice was more serious without the pleading tone. Sophie, I know my parents sent you a letter. Yes, I replied. I'm not involved in that, he said quickly. I don't want any more tension. I gave a sad smile. You're not involved, but you're not stopping them either. Ethan was silent, then said in a low voice. Sophie, I'm genuinely worried about you. My mother has hired a very influential lawyer. Don't be stubborn. Ethan, I called his name, my voice steady. Have you ever wondered why I insist on keeping my son? Because he's your son, he replied. It's not just that, I said. It's because if I give in one more time, I'll cease to be myself. I already gave in once, agreed to leave quietly. That time, I lost a husband. If I give in this time, I lose my son, and I won't survive that. Ethan sighed. I don't want to see you suffer, but you're not doing anything to make me suffer less either, I said directly. You've chosen to stay in the middle, and staying in the middle is letting others decide for you. He couldn't argue. He just said, sorry, and hung up. This time, my heart expected nothing from him. At 6 months, I started to feel noticeably heavier. My back ached, my feet swelled, and my nights were short. But every time I had an ultrasound and heard my son's heart beating rhythmically, I felt it was all worth it. The doctor advised me to avoid stress, but that was easier said than done. How could I not be stressed knowing people were waiting for me to make one wrong move? One afternoon, coming back from a checkup, and called agitated. Sophie, your mother-in-law called me. Her voice was tense. I figured. She was direct and said. She said, if you don't cooperate, she'll send someone to stay near you and monitor your every move. I stopped in my tracks. Monitor me? Yes. And lowered her voice. To find a flaw. To prove you don't have the conditions to raise your son. I clenched my fists. The sense of invasion made me nauseous, but I didn't let myself panic. Anne, listen to me, I said. If they do that, they're showing their hand. I'm not going to run. Are you sure? Anne worried. I'm sure, I replied. I've done nothing wrong. I'm not afraid. A few days later, I did notice a strange presence in my neighborhood. A middle-aged woman dressed discreetly, who spent a lot of time at the cafe across the street, her gaze always in my direction. I didn't need to guess who had sent her. I didn't avoid her. I continued my walks, went to my appointments, lived my life normally. I wanted them to see I was not a neglectful mother, let alone the loose woman they had once tried to paint me as. Once returning from the supermarket, the woman approached me. You're Sophie, right? She asked in a friendly tone. Yes, that's me, I replied. I'm an acquaintance of your son's paternal family, she smiled. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I looked her straight in the eye. If you want to know how I'm doing, please contact my lawyer. Her smile vanished. She backed away without another word. That night, I was exhausted. I sat on the bed, stroking my belly, and the tears came without my realizing. My son, I whispered. Am I being selfish for not giving you a complete family? He didn't answer, but his light kicks made my throat tighten. But if I went back, you would live in a family where your mother has to bow her head, live in fear. I don't want you to grow up in that environment, I continued. I want you to see your mother as strong, not resigned. That night, I dreamt I was standing between two doors. On one side was the family estate where my mother-in-law waited, her gaze cold. On the other was a long road where only my son and I walked hand in hand. Without hesitation, I chose the second road. The next morning, Ethan sent me a text. Sophie, I'm going to talk to my parents again. I read it but didn't reply. I no longer believed in promises that never materialized. At the end of the month, my lawyer called. The other party wants a meeting to negotiate directly. Your ex-husband and his mother will be present, she said. I accept, I replied after a moment's thought. But on one condition, anything agreed upon must be put in writing. She gave a small smile. You're doing the right thing. I knew the next meeting would be a real battle. It would no longer be insinuations, but a direct confrontation between me and the woman who had once treated me like a stranger. That night, I called Anne. I think the days ahead are going to be very tense, I said. And was quiet for a moment, then said, Sophie, I'm not advising you to give in anymore. You've come this far. I know. I looked out the window at the pale light from the street lamps. This time, I will see it through to the end. I placed my hand on my belly and took a deep breath. My son continued to grow there day by day, and as long as he was inside me, I would have the strength to stand tall. The negotiation meeting was set for a late weekday afternoon. I arrived 10 minutes early, not out of anxiety, but because I didn't want them to see me rushing in, as if I were at a disadvantage. I sat with my back straight, my hands on my belly, feeling every movement of my son. At 6½ months, he was already big enough for me to know I was no longer alone. Ethan arrived a few minutes after me. He walked in, his gaze sweeping past me to rest on my belly, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He was thinner, his face drawn, lacking the self-assuredness of the man who once stood between two women, thinking he could control everything. You're here early, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, not holding his gaze for long. Shortly after, my mother-in-law and uncle-in-law entered. She was the same, her stride purposeful, her gaze sharp. She didn't greet me, just nodded at Ethan and sat in the chair opposite. The uncle sat beside her, his face serious, but more restrained than last time. My lawyer and their lawyer were also present. Once everyone was seated, the air in the room grew so heavy I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. "Shall we begin?" the opposing lawyer asked formally. My mother-in-law crossed her arms and looked directly at me. "I'll be direct. I don't like to beat around the bush." "Neither do I," I replied, keeping my voice calm. She smirked. "Good. This child, whether you like it or not, is our family's grandson. That will not change." I nodded. "I have never denied his lineage." "Then it's simple," she said. "After he is born, you will hand him over to us to raise. You will be allowed visitation." Ethan turned to look at me, concern clear on his face. I took a deep breath and said slowly, "I do not agree." "Don't be hasty," my mother-in-law countered. "Our family will provide full financial support. You won't lack for money, but you do lack a proper family for the child." "Eleanor," I looked at her directly. "A proper family isn't where there's the most money, but where people don't have to live in fear." The atmosphere grew tense. The uncle cleared his throat lightly, as if to ease the tension. "Sophie, calm down. We are all thinking of the child's well-being." "I am thinking of my son's well-being," I replied. "We just have different ideas of what that means." My lawyer interjected. "According to the law, my client has full custodial rights. The other party is only entitled to visitation if an agreement is reached. The law is one thing. Reality is another," my mother-in-law sneered. I clenched my fists but kept my voice firm. "I respect the law and I respect myself." Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. "Mom, I think we should let Sophie raise our son." The room fell silent. My mother-in-law whipped her head toward Ethan. "What did you say?" Ethan swallowed and continued slowly but clearly. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but Sophie is the mother. She has the right." My mother-in-law slammed her fist on the table. "Has she bewitched you? Have you forgotten who raised you?" Ethan lowered his head. "I haven't forgotten. But I can't keep hurting Sophie either." I looked at him, a strange feeling growing inside me. For the first time in a long time, Ethan was on my side. But the feeling wasn't enough to soften me. "Ethan," I said, "I appreciate you saying that, but I don't need you on my side in words. I need it in action." He fell silent. My mother-in-law turned back to me, her gaze colder than ever. "You think a few words from Ethan settles this? Our family does not give up easily." I nodded. "I know, but I don't give up easily either." Their lawyer began presenting proposals, significant financial support from the father's family in exchange for shared custody with the possibility of the child living with his grandparents later on. I listened and then shook my head. "I do not accept shared custody," I said. "I don't want my son to grow up being pulled from one side to the other." "You're being selfish," my mother-in-law growled. "Perhaps," I replied. "But it is a selfishness to protect my son." Ethan turned to me, his voice pleading. "Sophie, think carefully. You don't have to carry this burden alone." I looked at him, my gaze calm. "Ethan, when I needed you, you didn't carry it with me." The words made him pale. The negotiation dragged on for over 2 hours with no resolution. In the end, my lawyer concluded, "If there is no agreement, we will maintain our position and are prepared to go to court." My mother-in-law stood and adjusted her coat. She looked me up and down, her expression a mix of anger and contempt. "You have chosen the hardest path." I stood too, placing a hand on my belly. "I have chosen the path I will not regret." She said nothing more, turned, and walked out. The uncle sighed, shook his head, and followed. Ethan remained behind, looking at me for a long moment. "Sophie, go," I said. "Save your strength for the person you chose." He stood frozen for a few seconds, then left. I watched him go. It didn't hurt anymore. I only felt a void that had finally closed. When everyone was gone, I sat down, exhausted. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did very well." I smiled faintly. I just did what a mother has to do. I walked out of the room and stood in the hallway for a long time, breathing deeply. My son gave a small kick as if to encourage me. I stroked my belly and whispered, "I'm not giving up." I knew this battle wasn't over. But after that day, I realized one thing. I was no longer afraid of them. Fear only exists where there is hesitation, and I had already made my choice. After the negotiation, I went home to the apartment completely drained, not from the arguments, but from having to control every word, every breath to keep from falling apart in front of them. I closed the door and leaned against it for a long time. In the silence, I felt my son move, his small kicks firm, as if reminding me that all my efforts had a reason. The following days were heavy. I limited my outings, only going for checkups and then coming straight home. The woman watching me was still there, but her gaze was different, more cautious. Perhaps she had realized I was not easily intimidated. I wasn't doing anything wrong, so they had no way to slander me. Ethan didn't call again. I don't know if it was out of weariness or his mother's orders, but the silence brought me a certain peace. At least I didn't have to deal with half-hearted apologies and weightless promises. And called every evening. She could tell from my voice that I was tired. "Sophie, you've lost weight," she'd say. "It's the pregnancy." I'd smile. "Don't overdo it," she advised. "You're having the baby soon. Don't let them wear you down." "I know." I placed my hand on my belly. "I have my son. I can't afford to fall." One morning, I got a call from the clinic. The doctor told me my latest tests showed signs of mild preeclampsia and that I needed to be monitored closely and avoid stress. Hearing that, my heart sank. After so many days of being strong, my body was finally showing signs of weakness. I immediately called Anne. When she heard, she became very worried. "That's not good, Sophie. You need to seriously rest. I'm making arrangements to come join you." "No," and I stopped her. "I'm okay. The doctor said it's mild." But that night, I couldn't maintain my composure. I sat on the bed looking at the test results and tears came without me realizing. I wasn't scared for myself. I was scared for my son. I was afraid that because of my stubbornness, he would suffer the consequences. Just then, the doorbell rang. I jumped. At this hour, I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my heart raced. It was Ethan. I opened the door, but didn't let him in right away. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Ethan looked at me, his eyes full of concern. "I heard you weren't well." "Who told you?" I demanded. "Your doctor." "My mother knows her," he said in a low voice. I clenched my fists. "Go away, Ethan." "Sophie. Let me in." "Just for a minute," he pleaded. "Just 1 minute." I hesitated, but finally opened the door. He came in and stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room like a stranger. His gaze fell on my belly, full of pain. "You look very tired," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I don't have that obligation," I replied. Ethan sighed. "I know I don't have that right anymore, but Sophie, please don't carry this all alone." I looked at him, my voice weary. "What do you want me to do? Hand my son over to your family?" "No," he shook his head. "I want to at least be able to take care of you right now." I smiled sadly. "Take care how?" "By standing in the middle between me and your mother." Ethan lowered his head for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I had a fight with my mother." I looked up, surprised. I told her, if she keeps pressuring you, I won't accept any of the family's arrangements, he continued. I know talk is cheap and actions are hard, but this time I don't want to have any more regrets. I was silent. I didn't know if I should believe him. I had gotten used to having no expectations. Sophie, he stepped closer, but kept his distance. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking you to let me fulfill my duty as a father, at least to protect you both now. I looked at him for a long time. In that moment, I saw the fatigue in his eyes. It wasn't fake. But I also saw that the crack between us could never be repaired. You can visit your son later, I said. But don't stay here. I need quiet. Ethan nodded without arguing. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. Sophie, whether you believe it or not, I'm going to try to keep my word. At least this once, he said. The door closed. I leaned against the wall, breathing with difficulty. I didn't know how long his promise would last, but I knew I couldn't let these matters continue to affect my health. I called my lawyer and asked her to send a formal notice to the other party, demanding they cease all forms of psychological pressure under threat of legal action. She handled it quickly. I no longer had the strength to be gentle. For the last few days of that month, I spent nearly all my time resting. And called daily to tell me trivial stories to distract me. One day, she asked randomly, Sophie, have you ever thought that if you hadn't married Ethan, your life would be different now? I was quiet, then replied, I don't know, but if I hadn't gone through this, I wouldn't have my son. And said nothing more. Sometimes that's enough. One afternoon, my mother-in-law called. I stared at the screen for a long time but finally answered. How are you? I asked. She was silent for a few seconds, then said. The doctor said you need to rest. I don't want anything to happen to my grandson. Hearing that, my heart faltered. It was the first time she had spoken of my son with that tone in her voice. Neither do I said quietly. I'll suspend everything for now, she continued. At least until you have the baby. I closed my eyes. I didn't know if it was a sincere concession or just a strategic retreat, but in that moment, I accepted it. Thank you, Eleanor, I said. I hung up. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the life pulsing inside. I knew the road ahead was still long, but at least I had managed to protect the most important thing, the peace of my child within me. That night, I slept deeply. In my dream, I saw myself holding my son in my arms under a soft light. There were no arguments, no judgmental gazes, only the peace of the two of us. In the days following that call, my apartment returned to a rare state of tranquility. There was no more stranger at the cafe across the street, no more urgent calls from lawyers. I knew this silence didn't mean they had given up, but that they were respecting the truce my mother-in-law had promised. For me, at that moment, it was enough. I entered the 8th month of pregnancy. My body was noticeably heavier. Turning over in bed was an effort. My back ached, my feet swelled, and my nights were broken. But strangely, amidst the fatigue, my heart felt more serene. Perhaps because I knew I was getting closer and closer to meeting my son. And came to visit at the beginning of the month. The moment she walked in, she frowned. You're so thin. It's the pregnancy. I smiled. And put down her suitcase and went straight to the kitchen. I'm cooking for you. From now on, you're forbidden from eating hastily. I watched her bustling in the kitchen. The smell of hot soup filled the apartment, and suddenly, my eyes stung. It had been a long time since I had felt what it was like to be cared for unconditionally with no ulterior motives. That evening, we sat on the sofa. And placed her hand on my belly and felt the baby kick. He's strong, she laughed. He'll be stubborn like me, I said. And turned to me, her voice lower. Sophie, are you scared? The delivery is getting close. I was silent for a moment, then said honestly. I'm scared of the pain. Scared I won't be a good mother? Scared of being alone? And squeezed my hand. But you still chose this path. Yes. I nodded. Because if I hadn't, I would regret it for the rest of my life. A few days later, Ethan sent a message. Just one sentence. Take care of yourself. I won't bother you anymore. I read it but didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I didn't want to depend on any attention that could disappear at any moment. In the third week of the month, I had to be hospitalized for observation due to a spike in my blood pressure. The doctor told me to stay on bed rest for a few days. Staring at the white ceiling, I felt a sense of emptiness, but placing my hand on my belly and feeling my son move, I felt stronger. My mother-in-law called while I was in the hospital. I hesitated but answered. Where are you? She asked. I'm in the hospital, I replied. There was a silence on the other end. A moment. Later, she said in a lower voice. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't want to worry anyone, I replied. She sighed. I clearly heard the weariness in her breath, so different from the harsh woman of the past. I told everyone not to bother you, she said. Try to take care of yourself. I didn't know what to say. I just said quietly, I will. The call ended quickly. I looked at the phone, my heart a little shaken. Perhaps in the face of an impending birth, the line between right and wrong, winning and losing, became blurrier. But I didn't let myself soften to the point of giving in. And visited me in the hospital every day, bringing fruit, books, and telling me all sorts of stories to distract me. One day she asked, if later on his family backs down and just asks to visit the child respectfully, will you let them? I thought for a long time. Then I said, if they respect me and my son, I won't stop them. I don't want my son to grow up in the middle of hatred. Anne nodded. That's enough. I was discharged a week later. The doctor gave me strict instructions and told me to prepare for a possible early delivery. I went home and reorganized everything. The newborn clothes, the diapers, the towels, one by one. Every time I folded a tiny piece of clothing for my son, I felt my heart calm as if the entire storm had been left behind. One night, as I was organizing some papers, the doorbell rang. I jumped. I opened the door to see Ethan alone. Sorry to show up unannounced, he said. I just wanted to give you this. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a statement signed by him confirming that he respected my right to custody of our son, that he would not contest or apply any further pressure, and that he only requested to be allowed visitation under a future agreement. I looked at the paper for a long time. Does your mother know about this? I asked. Ethan shook his head. I did this on my own. It's my responsibility. I looked up at him. This time, I didn't see the usual hesitation in his eyes. Thank you, I said. But this paper is only valuable if you keep your word. Ethan nodded. He stayed a little longer, then left. I closed the door, leaned against it, and sighed. I didn't know what the future held, but at least I saw a glimmer of clarity amidst the confusion. That night, my son moved more than usual. I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, my baby, we're going to meet soon. I no longer felt the same fear as before. I knew I wasn't perfect, but I was determined enough not to let anyone decide for me. The next day, I got a text from Anne. Everything's ready, future mama. I smiled and replied, everything's ready. I looked out the window. The soft morning light was spilling into the living room. I realized the hardest part was perhaps behind me. Ahead was a new journey, not an easy one, but one I had chosen with all the love of a mother. The contractions started one night while the city was still asleep. I woke up to a sharp tightening in my lower abdomen. It wasn't violent, but it was clear enough for me to know the time had come. I sat up, took a deep breath, and placed my hand on my belly. My son gave a small kick, a familiar, strangely calm signal. "My baby," I whispered, my voice trembling, but my heart firm. "We're going to meet." I called in first. The phone had barely rung once when she answered. "Sophie, I'm having pains." "I think I'm having the baby," I said succinctly. "Stay there." 5 minutes, she shouted before hanging up. I got dressed and grabbed the hospital bag that had been packed for weeks. Everything happened quickly, but without panic. I didn't cry. I didn't freak out, perhaps because I had been waiting for this moment for so long with a mixture of fear and hope. On the way to the hospital, the pains intensified in increasingly defined waves. I squeezed Anne's hand tightly, my forehead slick with sweat. Anne didn't talk much. She just kept repeating. "Breathe, Sophie. Breathe." Her voice was shaking more than mine. In the delivery room, the white lights were blinding. The doctors and nurses moved quickly and professionally. I heard their voices. I heard my son's heartbeat on the monitor. With each contraction, I closed my eyes, gritted my teeth, and pushed with all my might. There was a moment when the pain reached its peak that I thought I couldn't go on. I started to cry and quietly called out my son's name. And as if he were answering, an immense strength surged through me. A mother's instinct guided me. My son's cry echoed in that white space, fragile but clear. I froze. All other sounds disappeared. The doctor came over and placed my son on my chest. "A boy," she smiled. I looked at his tiny red wrinkled face, his eyes still closed and the tears came uncontrollably. I gently touched his cheek, my hand shaking. "Welcome, my son," I whispered. In that moment, all the pain, all the humiliation, all the long nights of fear dissolved. I was no longer the woman who was left behind. I was a mother. And was by my side, her eyes red. She squeezed my hand, her voice choked. "Sophie, you were amazing." I smiled, exhausted but happy. After being moved to the recovery room, I slept deeply. When I woke up, morning sun was streaming through the window. My son was sleeping peacefully in his bassinet beside me. I watched him for a long time, afraid that if I blinked, he would disappear. The phone vibrated. It was a text from Ethan. I had notified him before going into labor. Just a short, emotionless sentence. His text read, "I'm at the hospital." I was quiet for a moment, then replied, "You can come in." Ethan entered the room slowly, as if afraid of startling me. He stopped when he saw the baby, his gaze fixed on the tiny face. I saw tears in his eyes. "My son," he said in a low, choked voice. "Your son," I replied calmly. Ethan approached but kept his distance. He bent down to look at the baby. His hand reached out, then retracted as if he were standing before something precious for the first time and wasn't sure he had the right to touch it. "Can I hold him?" he asked very quietly. I looked at him, then at my son. I nodded. "You can." Ethan picked up the baby awkwardly, his body tense. The baby stirred a little and then fell back asleep. Ethan looked at him and tears streamed down his face. "Thank you, Sophie," he said. "Thank you for having our son." I didn't answer. I didn't need that thanks, but I didn't reject it either. In that moment, I let things be. In the afternoon, my mother-in-law arrived. She stood at the door for a long time before entering. When she saw the baby, her face softened as if all her hardness had melted away. "My grandson," she said quietly. I nodded. "Hello, Eleanor." She approached the bassinet, looked at the baby for a long time, her hand trembling. She didn't pick him up, just gently touched his tiny hand. "I'm sorry," she said in a low voice. "Sorry for causing you so much stress." I looked at her. I felt neither anger nor pity. I just saw a woman used to controlling everything who upon facing a new life understood that some things cannot be controlled. I just want you to leave us in peace, I said, so my son can grow up normally. She nodded very slowly. I understand. She didn't mention custody again. Didn't bring up any conditions. She just stood there looking at her grandson, then turned to me. If you'll allow it, I'd like to visit him from time to time, she said. I was silent for a moment. If everyone respects my boundaries. Yes, she nodded. When they left, the room became quiet again. I looked at my son and felt an immense relief. I knew things weren't completely resolved, but at least my son had been born in peace. The following days passed slowly. I was learning to breastfeed, to change diapers, to soothe my son to sleep. There were nights I was exhausted, sitting up with him in my arms in the yellow light of a lamp, crying from fatigue. But all it took was for him to stir a little for all that fatigue to feel worthwhile. And stayed with me for the first few weeks. She handled the baby with incredible ease, always smiling. He's the spitting image of you, she'd say. Yes, I'd smile. Stubborn like me. One morning, while my son was sleeping, I stood by the window watching the sun on the floor. I thought about everything I had been through, the lost marriage, the humiliation, the times I thought I couldn't go on. If I could go back, I would still feel the pain. I would still cry, but I would no longer wish I hadn't lived it. Because without those losses, I wouldn't have my son. Ethan visited the baby occasionally. He didn't stay long, didn't meddle in my life. Every time he came, he kept his distance, as if constantly reminding himself of his boundaries. I didn't hate him. I didn't cling to him either. I let everything be in its place. One afternoon, when my son was a month old, I took him out onto the balcony. A gentle breeze blew. He opened his eyes and looked at me, his gaze clear. My baby, I said in a low voice, I don't promise you a life without pain, but I promise I will never let anyone force you to bow your head. He made a small sound as if in reply. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly whole. Not because of money, not because of status, but because I had managed to protect what was most important. I went back inside and closed the door. Behind me was the past. Ahead of me was my son, and I knew that from that day on, I would no longer live to please anyone else. I would live to be a mother. A woman's life is not measured by what she has endured, but by whether in the end she had the courage to stand up and protect what matters most. I once thought that resignation was a virtue, that taking a step back would preserve the peace. But I was wrong. Some steps back don't lead to peace, but to the loss of oneself. I was a wife who tried to fulfill her duty, a daughter-in-law who bowed her head to maintain harmony, a woman who blamed herself for not being able to have children. But it was only when I faced the risk of losing the child in my womb that I understood a painful truth. When you don't value yourself, no one else will. This baby was not just my flesh and blood. He was a reminder that women are not born to be sacrifices for reputation, for other people's families, or for the weak choices of men. Being a mother is not just about giving life. It is about taking full responsibility for our own lives and the lives of our children. If you are reading this story and see a reflection of yourself, a woman forced to give in, to be understanding, to think of the greater good, I want to tell you one thing. No greater good is more important than your own worth. No one has the right to decide your life but you. Money can buy silence, but it cannot buy peace. A family with all its members present but without respect will hurt a child far more than a home with a single mother filled with love. Don't be afraid of being called selfish when you are protecting what is right. Sometimes selfishness is the only way to be true to ourselves. The greatest lesson I learned is not that men are unreliable or that in-laws are always cruel, but that we must arm ourselves with enough inner strength so that in any circumstance we are never backed into a corner. Love yourself first so that others can love you the right way. If you are at a crossroads today, stop for a moment and ask yourself, if I continue to stay silent, what kind of person will I be in 10 years? The answer will show you the way. And if this story made you feel you are not alone, share it. Perhaps somewhere there is a woman who desperately needs to remember that she has the right to live a life with her head held high.